And it's another week, another edition of the College 12-Pack. I'm your host, Patrick Kahn, senior editor of collegesportswire.usatoday.com. With me, as always, Tyler Natuno of the LSU Tigers Wire. Tyler, we got a packed show this week. I am glad to report that news broke before we sat down to record this podcast, as opposed to previous weeks where we talked about something and then not even 2 hours later, it all came to a head. Big news out of Northwestern. Feels like we're doing a Northwestern update every week. Skip Holtz, special advisor to the head coach, while he's still a sitting USFL head coach. Tyler, what can you make sense of this? Because to me, it doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can kind of see the logic behind it. I mean, bringing in a guy with head coaching experience for this situation makes a lot of sense, right? Like David Braun is a guy who we've talked about before, like is a newcomer to not just being a head coach, but newcomer to the FBS ranks in general, has 2 years of play calling experience. So like at the Division I level, actually, not even FBS, because he came from North Dakota State. So yeah, like I think bringing in a guy in Skip Holtz who, has a lengthy tenure as a head coach, kind of up and down, but pretty solid. I get it to an extent. What's interesting to me here, I guess, is the question of like, is he a guy to watch for the permanent job here? I mean, I would say like if Braun, I mean, the expectations going into this year at Northwestern are not like absurd. So if Braun can just kind of coast, I think he's got a pretty good shot of keeping that job full time. But if they overachieve and, maybe the brass credits Holtz for that, maybe he becomes a candidate. I mean, like you said, he's kind of got his own gig already. He's, won back-to-back titles in the USFL with the Birmingham Stallions. So, would he leave that for Northwestern? Probably, because it's a lot of money. But yeah, I just think that to me is interesting because, like I said, bringing in a guy with experience makes sense. And then the other side of that coin is, is this a guy to watch as potentially, angling for the full-time job?
Yes, that's a tough one. I mean, and it's not like Skip Holtz doesn't have experience at a high level at the collegiate level, right? The expectations are going to be really low, but at the same time, Braun just felt like the move they had to make, regardless. Nobody's out there right now ready to make a move to take over a program less than a month from kickoff, and so they had to make that move. Skip Holtz, yeah, it's a smart move, I think. And that would be interesting if Skip Holtz ultimately ends up being the head coach. We'll see as the coaching carousel spins. It's already started spinning, which is crazy to me. But let's get into the big thing that everybody's talking about right now. Pac-12 media deal. Report came out yesterday. Oh, I'm sorry. Report came out on Tuesday because you're probably listening to this on a Thursday or Friday. On Tuesday, it came out. Pete Thamel reports Apple TV. That's the deal. Very similar to MLS. But the big caveat here is, you want to make money, Pac-12 schools? You're going to have to sell subscriptions. This feels like George Kliakoff, however you say his name. I'm sure I'm butchering it. It kind of feels like he went to Larry Scott and said, hey, can I copy your homework off, the last media deal they did? Pac-12 network needed to sell subscriptions as well. The jokes are flying, Tyler, with this deal, and I don't think anybody's surprised by that.
Yeah, it's been a bit of fun week in the Pac-12, and by that I mean it has not been a fun week in the Pac-12. So let's not bury the lead here too much, because apparently Friday news dumps no longer exist, and now the prime time to drop news is Wednesdays around 6 p.m. Eastern, because last week, just hours after we recorded, Colorado, obviously, news starts to leak that they're leaving the conference, and, now other people are following suit. I mean, we could be looking at a breakup of the Pac-12, and this is all significant when it comes to the media deal, because obviously not having Colorado in for this round of negotiations probably devalues the conference a little bit. Look, we don't know the figures of this Apple TV deal, at least definitively. Most of that's kind of remained pretty ambiguous. But what we can pretty much say definitively is it's not going to pay out as much on a per school basis as the Big 12 deal did a couple months ago. And, this deal is going to, if this were agreed to, it would be a fully streaming deal. And like you mentioned, this brings a whole level of questions about, who's going to actually pay for this product, right? Because I don't have Apple TV, but from what Apple TV Plus, but from what I understand, so you'd have to pay the baseline subscription fee, but also, so they have, like you said, the MLS package. That's an additional, I think, like $60 a year or something like that. I'd assume
so the way it works, not to interrupt, but the way it works is they're paying $79.99 if you're an Apple Plus subscriber. Mm-hmm. If you're not, it's $99. Yeah. So there's different tiers.
So and I would assume that any Pac-12 package would probably be like about that price, if not more expensive. Like, are people really gonna pay for this to watch like Oregon State and Cal? I don't know.
Here's my deal: if SEC came out with SEC Plus only on Apple TV, I would buy that right now. You cannot convince me to buy the Pac-12 package.
I mean, honestly, I might
have that I want to see.
I'm an absolute psycho, so I might, but I do this for a living and I love college football, and it's a debate for me. I don't know how you would convince any casual fan to go for that. That's not just like a diehard Cal fan or whatever.
Are you saying that you're part of the sicko committee?
I am. I do consider myself part of the sicko committee.
Card-carrying member, Tyler Nitchino.
Yeah, card-carrying member. But so, yeah, I mean, this is just a really tough situation. It's a hard sell. I mean, obviously, I think the Pac-12 wants to get this done as soon as possible. They met with the teams. Nothing's done. Looks like they're going to have to meet again. I don't think this is a very compelling offer. And when you've got potentially half the league, if not more, looking to jump ship, I don't know if this is going to save you.
So that brings me to my next topic. Let's talk about it. Realignment HAVOC. I'm excited about this. We could have HAVOC. When I wrote my notes for this podcast, Tyler, we did not know that HAVOC was coming, but the Big Ten, according to a report from Dan Wetzel, and it has been confirmed by several other insiders, the Big Ten is looking at 4 schools, count of 4, of the Pac-12. We're talking Stanford, Cal. Those are the throw-ins. But they want the big dogs, Oregon and Washington. That would leave the Pac-12 with 5 schools. Oh, wait, Arizona State, Utah, all rumored to go to the Big 12. So that would leave the Pac-12 with, if my math is correct too, we could be upon realignment HAVOC, and the 2 schools that kind of seem like they're left out in the dust, Oregon State, Washington State. I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, I mean, the developments, and we'll get into this more a little bit in a second, but the developments with the Arizona schools, with Utah, that was, that's one thing, and that's, I think, a blow. I think if they lost those schools, it would hurt a lot, but I don't think that's necessarily like the death blow to the conference. But yeah, this was pretty much the worst case scenario. The Big Ten calling for Oregon and Washington. That's what I think everyone was afraid of. If they just go with the all academic angle and take Cal and Stanford too, I think we're witnessing the breakup of this conference. And obviously, Wetzel's report seems to confirm the Big Ten looking to expand. These Pac-12 teams are not the only candidates they're looking at, just to be clear. There's been rumors about Florida State being involved, about Clemson being involved, but both those schools are under current grant of rights deals that have more than a decade left on those contracts. So, what is it they're estimating? Florida State would owe like $300 million in an exit fee if they tried to leave right now?
Yeah, according to Jeff Swaim, that would be the $300 million. Clemson's, we know, is probably north of $100 million. Nobody's paying 9 figures to get out of that deal, at least right now, I don't think. Yeah. But it makes you wonder if that buyout number is diluted a little bit, and we don't have the real numbers. Because if you remember, Texas and Oklahoma, 1 year left on their grant of rights deal, had to pay $100 million to get out of that, to get out of the Big 12 so they could go to the SEC. But so the numbers are swirling around. But yeah, and I don't know if it's the Big 10 that's going to be the death blow, the Big 12 that's going to be death blow, or if they're just going to tag team and do it at the same time.
Yeah. And I think, one thing I do real quick before we move on, I do think it's worth pointing out that the I believe he's the head of the Board of Regents for FSU, has gone on the record and is basically saying that the grant of rights deal is not going to be the obstacle that keeps Florida State from leaving the ACC if they want to. So I mean, they seem to think it's viable. We'll see how that actually plays out when we have a better feel for what the actual numbers are and stuff. But I think, going back to what this could all look like you said, if the Big 12 and Big 10 kind of at the same time come in and treat the Pac-12 like a buffet, I mean, if you really do get left with like Oregon State and Washington State, and then like maybe the Big 10 leaves Cal and Stanford be, but if that's your group, I mean, truthfully, your options at that point, I think, are like merge with the Mountain West. That's about it. Like, I don't know what else you do.
And we're going to get into all of that and what this could mean in the grander scheme pretty soon. But let's talk about those corner schools. Arizona State. We know the Board of Regents met earlier this week. Not even 30 seconds after they started their meeting, they went to an executive convening. Cut the feed. They didn't want anybody to know what they were talking about. I think it's a formality. We know what they're referring to. They have an invitation on the table to the Big 12 with guaranteed money. Because I don't know how you convince these school presidents and athletic directors to put together a budget based on what you could make. It seems like it might be a formality at this point. Arizona State. Utah might have to go begrudgingly to the Big 12 with BYU. Sign me up for the Holy War in 2024 as a Big 12 game. I would love to see it.
Yeah, I mean, not exactly surprising that the Arizona Board of Regents wouldn't want that to be public. I think one thing that I think is worth noting about that is that I think a lot of the smoke has mostly been around the University of Arizona, but that Board of Regents does oversee Arizona State, and Northern Arizona. So just to kind of clarify that the meeting has to do with all of the Arizona schools, not just the University of Arizona. And yeah, like you said with Utah, I mean, there's probably some, I guess you could call it bad blood about having to follow up BYU to the conference. Get over yourself. I mean, this is the new reality of college football. I mean, if the Big 10 is looking at, schools like Florida State and Clemson for expansion potentially, or Oregon, they're getting over themselves and the academic standards they've kind of held themselves to in the past, not to like take a shot at those schools academics wise, but they're not, the Big 10 in the past, that's, presented an obstacle for a lot of schools. But yeah, I mean,
it brings up an interesting point before we move on to Dan Lanning. I can remember back, I believe it was around 2010, 2009, maybe, Texas, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, a bunch of these schools talking about going to the Pac, and it's going to be the Big 12 that ends the Pac, or it could be. Very interesting, just to my, how the turntables, as the great Michael Scott would say. Now let's talk about Dan Lanning, Oregon. Was this an unnecessary shot at Colorado, or is there some bad blood there? Maybe some recruiting trail friction? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so for those of you that haven't seen, Dan Lanning at his press conference at Oregon Media Day to open up fall camp the other day, they asked him about Colorado leaving, and he said, I'm paraphrasing, but basically he's like, I don't really have a reaction to it. I mean, they've been around the league for a while, and what have they won? What do they have to show for it? I can't remember anything. I mean, look, shouldn't really be surprising that this is the way that people are kind of acting about it. I mean, Dion has kind of come in and upended everything, sort of the status quo across the board. Certainly rubbed not just coaches in the Pac-12, but coaches in other conferences. It's rubbed them the wrong way as well. So, to come in and not to say that Dion was like leading the charge of the move to the Big 12, but he was certainly, as a Texas guy, he was certainly in favor of it. So yeah, I think the way everything has played out, I'm sure has sort of left a sour taste in everyone's mouths, and they're all kind of feeling the anxiety. Look, there's kind of cope going on with what Lanning said, but also like you can't really argue with him. I mean, they've been in the league since 2011. They've had one winning season aside from the 2020 season in which they only played like 6 games. They've only had one winning season in conference play, and they lost to Oregon in the Pac-12 championship that year. So, he makes a valid point, I guess, but, certainly trying to convince everyone he's a little less mad than he is, I think.
Yeah, somebody's mad. Pat Narduzzi in the ACC is certainly mad.
He is very mad.
There's a lot of bad blood going around. At first, it raised my eyebrow a little bit. It's like, whoa, okay, there's some bad blood there. I didn't think. Now I need to see the Colorado-Oregon matchup just because I've got to see this. But here, moving on to the next thing I wanted to talk about. So much of this, and our colleague Brian Floyd, who made note of this, this is a time of year that we should be talking about other things, not realignment, not conference mergers, not grant of rights deal. This is the time of year that we're hyping up players. Who's going to win the Heisman? All of that. I think the preseason talk, kind of with this realignment talk, one should be discussed more than the other. And I'm not talking about realignment. I'm talking about getting ready for the 2023 college football season, the final year of the 14 playoff before we expand. And all we can talk about right now is which team's going to which conference, and that doesn't even come into play until 2024 at the earliest.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When it comes to this kind of thing, the sport just really loves shooting itself in the foot. It's August. It's August 2nd. We're supposed to be talking about football. It's football time. Fall camps are getting underway. The first games are in 3 weeks. That's what should be the focus of the conversation. But because of the way this league, just the sport as a whole, structures the release of news, it's not. And this happened last year too, by the way. If you remember, right before the season started, they broke the news about USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten and about college football playoff expansion to 12 teams. That all broke right before the start of the 2022 season. It completely overshadows it. And I'm not the first to make this point, but the NFL has figured this out. The NFL has a strict timetable for everything, and they have it set up so we're not talking about boring procedural legal developments on August 2nd.
Absolutely. And let's not forget what broke on day one of the SEC Media Days last year. Oklahoma, Texas going to the SEC, which we thought was going to happen in 2 years. It turns out it was only a year. All those things. But let's get back to what I was talking about. Preseason talk. That's my next one. And I'm going to talk about the Texas Longhorns because we should be talking about, is Texas back? Tyler thinks so. We've talked about this on the podcast before. There's a lot to like about Texas this year. Now, they're going to have targets on their back, but what is that any different than the other season? They're a team that's always televised. They're a team that everybody wants to talk about, and they've got I think they have a really good team this year. Do I buy in as in they are back? They're back to national relevancy? I don't know, but that's the fun of it. We don't know. We get to watch, but we're not even talking about that because we're worried about who's going to be the final death blow to the Pac-12. Tyler, looking at Texas going into this season, who is that one player that can make or break Texas being back in the upcoming season?
Yeah, I think I'll actually mention a guy that I called my defensive preseason MVP for the Big 12. Jalen Catalon, look, coming in from Arkansas, he is the X factor on this team. I think I expect the Texas offense is going to be pretty solid this year. I think even if Quinn Ewers isn't that guy for whatever reason, they've got enough talent in that room. Steve Sarkisian's a good offensive coach. They'll figure that side of the ball out. But this defense needs to get better. And Catalon's a guy that, if he's healthy, if he plays the way he did his first couple seasons at Arkansas, the defense is going to get better. It'll make a noticeable difference. And that might be the thing that kind of takes this team from being a top 4 team in the conference to being I think, definitively best team in the conference, which from a talent perspective, I think it is.
I'll say Jonathan Brooks, running back. We saw him a little bit. He's a guy I watched in high school run all over these kids down in Texas. He's a guy that I really like. And because you're having to replace a Bijan Robinson, yeah, you have a Don Mitchell, A.D. Mitchell, coming in from Georgia. You got wide receiver Palooza. You have the quarterbacks. But I really think it's the running back room that can really shine this year. And that's who I'm looking at, mostly because, well, you took the defensive guy. I'm going to go offense. Especially running backs, because running backs do, in fact, matter, despite what the NFL tries to tell you. What is the other big topic that I want to get into, preseason talk? Hey, is Jimbo ever going to put a date on that blank trophy? That's the big question I'm asking right now.
I swear to God, in all seriousness, the only thing I wrote in my notes for this section was LOL. I don't want to be entirely dismissive.
Valid.
Look, I don't want to be entirely dismissive. Like, I think that more likely than not, this ends up being like a fine season for Texas A&M. I think 5-7 was a bit of an aberration. I think they'll probably be back in that sort of 7-8 win, maybe even 9 win range this year. I mean, to me, just the most interesting thing that could, I almost feel like there's been so much news that we just still kind of forget that Bobby Petrino is this team's offensive coordinator. And like, I have no idea how that's going to work out. You've got two of the biggest egos in college football, both vying to, yeah, exactly. You've got two of the biggest egos in college football vying for power. We don't even know what his job description looks like because Jimbo won't tell us and he deflects every time he gets asked about it. I mean, this team has the potential to blow up in one of the funniest ways we've ever seen this year. But I don't think that's probably going to happen.
And for those of you that are not watching the video version and you're only checking out the audio, I was dropping the air quotes when he was talking about offense coordinator. No, it would be the funniest thing of all with the way that Connor Wegman played last year. They go back to Max Johnson as their starting quarterback this year. I would laugh a lot if that were to happen. But I do want to get back to the Pac-12 because lost in all of the expansion talk, the realignment, the implosion of the conference, the Pac-12 is interesting. They have the greatest collection of quarterbacks, I think, in the country, pound for pound. When you talk about Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix. Did I mention they have the reigning Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, Caleb Williams? And there are DJ, I'm going to let Tyler say it because I always mess it up, DJU. They have quarterbacks up and down. I mean, and I didn't even get into Jaden DeLoria and Jaden Rashada and some of these other names that you could see this year. Am I wrong, Pac-12? Quarterback conference, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly can't help feel a little bit betrayed by this conference because I feel like I'm out here stumping for this league. I'm driving the Pac-12 hype train. I'm trying to sell people on it, and they just can't even match that with like a baseline level of competence from an administrative perspective. It's a real bummer, man. Like this league has been so, generally speaking, so irrelevant for the past 7 years. I mean, it's been a long time since they've really had a team that was in that mix. And I think they have several this year that not only could be, but will be. Like you said, there's so many good quarterbacks, and it's the best quarterback league in the country, like far and away. And pretty much all these rosters are improving. The trajectories are good, and none of it matters because all we're worried about are the existential problems that they have. And we're worried about what conference is Oregon State going to be playing in 2025. And it's a shame because there's a lot of good teams that could have really interesting and fun years, and no one's going to care because the off the field stuff is just so overbearing.
Right. And it kind of frustrates me because I want to talk about who's got the best wide receiver trio in the country. Is it Washington? Is it Ohio State? Or is it Texas? That's what I want to talk about. Those are the debates that I want to get into. But instead, we're talking about realignment because that's what's commanding the headlines. But really, honestly, and we are going to get back into realignment talk, and I do apologize for that, but we have to get to this topic. What does the Pac-12 implosion mean for the college football playoff? Now, beyond 2025 or the 2025 season, there is no contract signed right now. But for 2024, they are expecting 6 conference champions to be in this, the 5 Power 5 and the highest group of 5. But if there is no Pac-12 in the 2024 season, how do they go about putting together a 12-team playoff? Because it was built on a model of 6 and 6.
It's a really good question. I don't think when they made this model that they thought there was any likelihood that the Pac-12 would cease to exist in 2024. But now that looks like it could be a possibility. I mean, I want to try to speculate and like come up with potential ideas, but it's just hard to say because there's just so much uncertainty about what is even going to happen, whether this league will exist. I mean, so like you said, you've got the 6 spots sort of set away for the 6 highest ranked conference champions. You could keep that system. I mean, there's no rule that says the Pac-12 has to be one of those 6. I mean, you could just keep it and maybe the Sun Belt winner or the American winner or whatever unholy mashup of the Pac-12 and Mountain West comes into existence, you could have that champion make it. I think more likely than not, they would probably reduce it to 5 and add another at-large bid, because at the end of the day, whoever that at-large team would be is going to bring more attention than whoever that extra non-power conference champion would be. But like I said, right now there's just so much speculation and so much up in the air. It's just really hard to say. But I'm sure they didn't anticipate having to rework the system already before it's even began.
That is for certain. It could be another group of 5 team. Probably not. I would think 1 is enough for as far as the champions go. We could see multiple group of 5 once the at-large bids are expanded to 6. But there is something going on in the state of Iowa I think we might want to talk about. It has come out, Hunter DEKKERS, quarterback of Iowa State, has been accused of tampering when it comes to the investigation of the state of Iowa, which has named several Iowa and Iowa State players, including the kicker of Iowa, betting the under on the Cyhawks game. That's a smart move. That is easy money.
He actually lost that bet, though. They hit the over.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's tough. I figured that they nailed it. I mean, we're talking about Iowa offense, but now the deal with Hunter DEKKERS, and he put out a statement through his lawyers through various social media channels, and basically said until this investigation is done, he can't report to fall camp. And my question is, did he originate the whole I can't report to fall camp, or did the school say you can't come to fall camp until this is dealt with? But either way, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the gambling. And we already saw what it did to Alabama having to go with a new baseball coach after they found out that their coach was betting on games.
Yeah. This isn't the first time we've seen this, obviously, but it's a pretty serious situation. And just to clarify, he's not just facing potential permanent ineligibility. He's been charged with the crime. So he's facing criminal charges. This is just one of those situations where, like I said, this is probably the most high profile we've seen, at least when it comes to a player. Like, obviously the Brad Bohannon thing was a pretty big deal, but when it comes to a player violating it, sitting starting quarterback, if DEKKERS is convicted, obviously he'll lose his eligibility. I don't have anything against online gambling. I don't want it to sound like I'm like taking an anti-gambling stance here. Like, we cover gambling. We have gambling partners, or have had gambling partners in the past. So I don't want to sound hypocritical with this, but like, this is just a situation where the NCAA, and I said something about this on Twitter, like they just have to come down hard on these situations. You can't, look, he put down, it wasn't just like he bet on one game, by the way. He put on, they approximate 366 online wagers, total value of nearly $3,000. And he bet on ISU games. You can't do that. And the rules couldn't be more clear. You're not allowed to bet on not only your sport, you're not allowed to bet on any sport at any level that the NCAA offers. If the NCAA offers basketball, you can't bet on high school basketball. That's just the rule. I mean, like I said, I rarely support the NCAA when they act like petty tyrants, but in this case, they absolutely have to, because you have to send a message. It's way too easy in the age of gambling. And as more states continue to legalize online sports betting, this is only going to become more pronounced. I mean, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. And I'm sure we're going to find a lot more high profile players. By the way, former Iowa player, currently with the Denver Broncos, among the players suspended by the NFL for betting on NFL games, is also facing criminal charges in Iowa for betting on Iowa games. So, I mean, this is just a really widespread problem in these states where it's legal.
Yeah, the interesting part is the NCAA is very clear in their bylaws. If you wager 200 or less, they go over the sports wagering rules, and you have to go through prevention education. If it's between $200 and $1 and $500, not only do you have to go over the rules, the education, but you lose 10% of your season's eligibility. If it goes beyond 500 to 800, 20%. Anything greater than 800 is a loss of 30%. However, the caveat I will bring up, that if you wager on your sport that you play in, or it is gone, you're done. Like if you're betting on your team, you're done. And to me, it kind of feels like Hunter Dekkers might be done if he did in fact bet on his own team, as the reports have shown. And it's funny because even with the kicker that we kind of mentioned at Iowa, was using his mom's account.
Dekkers was, I believe Dekkers. I don't want to misspeak here, but I did read a report. I believe that he was kind of doing it at the behest of his parents, is what seemed to be the case from what I was reading. So
regardless, you cannot. I mean, in their laws and their rules, and
100%.
We agree, right? The NCAA can be a joke at times, right? But in their laws, they basically say you cannot make a bet or provide information that will lead to a bet. In the industry, I believe they call that insider trading.
Yeah, I mean, it really is no different. Like anyone who's trying to defend it or be like, "Who cares? It's not a big deal." I mean, that they really are missing the point. Like it is fraud. Like you can't bet on something that you have insider knowledge of, even if you're betting on yourself. Like
especially if it messes with the integrity of the sport.
Exactly. And I mean, like I said, it looks a lot worse if you like bet against your own team, because then it could look like you're doing like point shaving or that kind of thing. But like, it doesn't even matter. You can't, like, if you have information at practice that other people don't have, you're committing fraud. Like that is literally what insider trading is.
Yep. And absolutely the fallout of this, it all boils down to, I feel like it's going to get worse before it gets better. The NFL is dealing with it. College is dealing with it. It's only a matter of time before they start gambling on high school games.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that they're going to have to work through as it becomes more prominent and more legal across the board. I'm sure it'll mellow out, but for the time being, it's going to be a real problem.
It will be a major problem. But that's going to do it for this edition of the College 12-Pack. We are taking a 1-week hiatus next week, but we will be back just in time the following week to get you ready for week 0 of the college football season. I'm excited to say that week 0. Probably going to talk heavy Notre Dame versus Navy in Dublin, Ireland. Lot to get into as we do all that. But for Tyler, I'm Patrick. See you next week.